They called him the Dragon of Seoul. Baek Sung-ho wasn't just a boss, he was a ghost story told in the shadows of the underworld. But he never walked the city streets alone. By his side was Brutus, a 130-pound Rottweiler that people whispered was bred from the fires of hell itself. Hardened criminals looked at the floor when Brutus bared his teeth, and rivals chose surrender over the chance of meeting his jaws in a dark alley. No one, not even the most seasoned trainers, could get within arm's reach of Sung-ho without the dog sensing blood. Until one humid night, a broke, exhausted waitress named Alicia Monroe did the unthinkable. She didn't flee. She didn't cry out. She did something that paralyzed the room and rewrote the rules of the Baek Syndicate forever. This is the story of how a waitress tamed a devil's hound and the man who thought he owned them both. The Onyx Lounge wasn't just a bar, it was a fortress of glass and neon for the elite predators of the Korean Mafia. The air was thick with the scent of premium soju and the heavy, electric hum of suppressed violence. Alicia Monroe smoothed her apron, her pulse thrumming in her throat. She had to stay invisible. Her brother's legal fees were a mountain she couldn't climb, and the debt collectors were already circling her apartment. Here, one high-stakes tip could buy her brother another month of safety. Table 9, the manager hissed, his forehead slick with sweat. Don't speak. Don't breathe. And whatever you do, do not make eye contact with the dog. Alicia didn't need to be told who was at table 9. The air in the lounge turned ice-cold the moment Baek Sung-ho stepped inside. He was a man of ink and iron, his neck and arms covered in tattoos that told a history of war. His black suit was tailored to perfection, but his expression was one of barely restrained power. Yet, the true terror was the shadow anchored at his heel. Brutus was a mountain of muscle, his coat gleaming like wet coal and his eyes tracking every movement in the room with predatory precision. He wore no leash, only a collar of heavy steel. Sung-ho didn't need a leash, the dog was an extension of his own violent will. Or so everyone thought, until Alicia's tray slipped, and the beast finally broke its chain. The air inside the Onyx Lounge didn't just smell of expensive tobacco and vintage whiskey, it smelled of held breaths. Under the neon glow of violet and deep amber, the power players of Seoul's underworld sat in semicircles of velvet and leather, their voices low enough to be drowned out by the smooth, melancholic jazz drifting from the speakers. Alicia Monroe adjusted the hem of her dark work apron, her fingers brushing against the rough skin of her palms, a map of old scars she worked hard to keep hidden under the long sleeves of her white shirt. "Keep moving, Monroe," a voice hissed near her ear. It was Rick, the floor manager, whose face was perpetually slick with the sweat of a man who knew exactly how replaceable he was. "Table 9 is arriving. If you so much as breathe in the wrong direction, I'll have you back on the south side before the sun comes up. Understand?" Alicia didn't look at him. She just nodded, her eyes focused on the silver tray balanced on her fingertips. She couldn't afford to lose this job. Every one she earned was a brick in the wall she was building around her younger brother, keeping the debt collectors and the ghosts of her past at bay. Suddenly, the jazz seemed to falter. The heavy double doors of the lounge swung open, and the temperature in the room plummeted. Baek Sung-ho didn't walk into a room, he claimed it. He stood tall and commanding, dressed in a black silk suit that seemed to absorb the neon light. Bold tattoos crawled up his neck, disappearing behind his jawline, shadows of a violent history that made even the toughest men in the room avert their gaze. But it was the beast at his heel that drew every eye. Brutus, a massive Rottweiler with muscles that rippled like polished stone, moved with a predatory grace that matched his master's. The dog wore a heavy steel collar, and though Sung-ho's hand gripped the handle, it was clear he was holding back a storm. Brutus's mouth was open mid-growl, his teeth gleaming white against his dark gums as he scanned the room for a threat. Alicia stepped forward to clear the path to table 9, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had seen dangerous animals before, but this was different. As Sung-ho passed, the sheer gravity of his presence made her step back. Her heel caught on the edge of a stray rug. Time seemed to liquefy. The tray tilted, the crystal glasses sliding with a sickening screech of friction. Crash. The sound of shattering glass was like a gunshot in the silent room. Shards flew, and a spray of amber liquid splashed onto Brutus's powerful chest. The dog didn't bark, he roared, a sound of pure, unadulterated fury. In a blur of black fur and bared teeth, Brutus broke from Sung-ho's grip, launching his 130-pound frame directly at Alicia's throat. The heavy impact of the Rottweiler's weight sent Alicia reeling, but she didn't fight the momentum. Instead of the expected scream, the sound of prey that would have triggered Brutus's final, lethal snap, there was only the hollow thud of her knees hitting the polished wood floor. She lowered her center of gravity, a move born of years in the K-9 trenches, and bowed her head just enough to expose the nape of her neck. It was a gamble on a universal language, the ultimate sign of submission in the predator world. Brutus's jaws were a jagged horizon of white bone inches from her face, his hot, metallic breath washing over her skin. The growl vibrating through her chest was a primal warning, a chainsaw revving in the sudden, suffocating silence of the lounge. Behind the dog, Baek Sung-ho stood like a statue of ink and iron, his hand hovering near his jacket, paralyzed by a sight he had never witnessed, someone standing their ground against his demon without a weapon. Alicia didn't look into the dog's eyes, she knew that was a challenge he would have to answer with blood. Instead, she focused on the frantic thrumming of his heart beneath his muscular chest. She began the rhythmic clicking of her tongue, a soft, percussive pulse that cut through the tension. Then, she let out a long, low-frequency hum, a sound she had used to soothe traumatized animals in the shadows of her past life. The effect was instantaneous and jarring. The rigid cables of muscle in Brutus's neck flickered, then softened. The snarl died, replaced by a confused tilt of the head. Slowly, with a hand that didn't tremble, Alicia reached out and pressed her palm flat against the dog's thundering heart. She matched her hum to his vibration, slowly lowering the pitch until the dog's breathing hitched and synchronized with her own. A collective gasp rippled through the Underworld elite. They watched, mesmerized, as the legendary killer let out a soft, broken whine and rested his massive block of a head on her shoulder. Sung-ho watched from above, his dark eyes narrowing with a predatory curiosity that had nothing to do with the waitress's face and everything to do with the impossible control she held over the beast he had spent a fortune trying to master. He had expected a bloodbath. Instead, he found a woman who spoke the language of monsters. "You're okay," Alicia whispered into the dog's velvet ear, her voice the only sound in the vacuum of the room. "Just a good boy in a very loud world." The adrenaline from the lounge floor had cooled into a leaden weight in Alicia's stomach by the time the clock struck 3. She stood in the damp darkness of the back alley, the Chicago wind biting through her thin hoodie, her hands still vibrating from the ghost of Brutus's heartbeat. She checked her phone, 3 more missed calls from an unknown number. The debt collectors weren't just circling anymore, they were closing in. She began to walk toward the bus stop, her head down, when the purr of a high-end engine cut through the silence. A black SUV with windows like obsidian rolled to a stop beside her. The back door clicked open, and the scent of expensive sandalwood and cold rain drifted out. "Get in, Miss Monroe," a voice commanded. It wasn't an invitation. Inside the vehicle, Baek Sung-ho sat enveloped in shadow. Beside him, Brutus let out a soft, welcoming huff, his heavy head immediately finding Alicia's lap as she sat down. Sung-ho didn't look at her at first, he was scrolling through a tablet that cast a surgical blue light over the bold tattoos on his neck. "You're a ghost, Alicia," he said, finally turning his gaze toward her. His eyes were like shattered ice, dissecting her in the dim light. "Former K-9 trainer, top of your class. You vanished 6 months ago, right about the time your brother's legal troubles began." Alicia felt exposed, as if he had peeled back her skin to read her secrets. "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know why a waitress has the hands of a professional soldier," he replied coldly. He gestured to the massive dog resting against her. Titus, Brutus, is a weapon that has forgotten how to be controlled. My men want to put him down because they fear him. But he doesn't bark at you. He listens. He leaned closer, invading her personal space until she could see the lethal intent in his expression. I'm offering you a transaction. You move into my estate. You become his primary handler. You feed him, you walk him, and you ensure he remains a tool I can use. And if I say no? Alicia's voice was a whisper. Then I drop you at the bus stop, Sung-ho said, his tone devoid of emotion. And by morning, I'll ensure your brother's creditors are given your current address. Or perhaps I'll simply let the police know exactly where their missing trainer is hiding. It was a deal wrapped in a velvet glove, but the steel beneath was unmistakable. Alicia looked down at the dog, whose amber eyes were filled with a soulful need for guidance. She was stepping out of the frying pan and into the dragon's den. I have conditions, she said, her voice finally finding its edge. Sung-ho smirked, a terrifying, sharp expression. Everyone does. Name them. The black SUV glided through a pair of massive iron gates, entering a world that felt less like a home and more like a high-tech fortress. The Baek estate was a masterpiece of glass, steel, and stone, perched on a hill that overlooked the shimmering lights of Seoul like a gargoyle. As the car came to a stop, Alicia felt the ominous click of the locks, a sound that echoed like a prison cell door shutting behind her. For the first few days, the estate was a labyrinth of cold marble and heavy silence. Alicia's world shrunk to the sprawling west wing and the walled gardens, where cameras followed her every move like unblinking eyes. Sung-ho was a ghost in his own house, leaving Alicia to the company of silent staff and the watchful, suspicious gaze of his security team. But she had Brutus. The retraining was grueling, a battle of patience against years of trauma. Alicia realized quickly that Brutus wasn't a killer by choice, he was a mirror. He was reacting to the sharp, violent energy of the men who handled him, the scent of gunpowder, the tension in their shoulders, and the way they treated him like a loaded gun rather than a living being. Precision, calm, predictability, Alicia whispered, establishing a new rhythm for the beast. She stripped away the heavy steel chains and replaced them with a soft, slack lead. She began the slow process of decompressing his nervous system, forcing him to make eye contact before he was allowed to eat, teaching him that his world no longer required constant war. One afternoon, in the center of the glass-walled solarium, Brutus hesitated. A security guard had slammed a door down the hall, and the dog's hackles rose, a low rumble vibrating in his chest. Alicia didn't flinch or shout. She simply hummed that low, rhythmic frequency and held out her hand, palm up. "Look at me, Brutus," she commanded softly. The dog's gaze snapped from the door to her eyes. For a long, heart-stopping moment, the killer instinct flickered behind his amber irises. Then, the tension drained out of him like water. He let out a long, shuddering sigh and rested his heavy chin in her open hand. He wasn't a monster anymore, he was a companion, rediscovering a loyalty that didn't require blood. From the shadows of the second-floor balcony, Sung-ho watched them, his silhouette dark against the glass. He saw the way the dog leaned into her, and for the first time, the mafia boss wondered if it was only the beast that needed taming. The moon hung low over the Seoul skyline, casting the Baek estate in a wash of silver and long, jagged shadows. Alicia stood in the center of the dark lawn, her feet bare against the cool grass. Beside her, Brutus sat with an alertness that was no longer frantic, his gaze fixed solely on her. In the silence of the midnight hour, there were no guards barking orders or heavy doors slamming. There was only the sound of the wind through the pines and the steady, grounding rhythm of their breathing. "Stay," Alicia whispered, the word barely a breath. She backed away, 5 paces, then 10. Brutus didn't move, though his ears twitched at the sound of a distant cricket. "Good," she murmured, and as she reached into her pocket for a reward, a floor-to-ceiling glass door slid open with a soft, expensive hiss. Baek Sung-ho stepped onto the terrace. He had discarded his suit jacket, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar and his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. In the moonlight, the tattoos that armored his skin looked alive, a dark tapestry of dragons and geometric daggers that seemed to move with every ripple of his muscles. He didn't approach, he simply leaned against a stone pillar, a glass of dark amber liquid in his hand, watching the woman and the beast as if they were a rare exhibit in a gallery. "He never stayed for me," Sung-ho said, his voice deep and gravelly in the quiet. "Even with a choke chain, he would have bolted or bitten." Alicia straightened, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. He didn't need a chain. He needed to know the world wasn't going to hit him the moment he let his guard down. Sung-ho descended the stairs, his movements fluid and dangerous. He stopped a few feet away, the light catching the sharp angle of his jaw. He looked at Brutus, then shifted his gaze to Alicia's arms. The moonlight was unforgiving, catching the jagged, pale lines on her forearms, scars that hadn't come from a dog, but from a man who used a badge to hide his malice. "You have a history of surviving things that were meant to break you," Sung-ho remarked, his eyes lingering on the marks. Alicia instinctively pulled her sleeves down, but his hand moved, faster than she could react, and caught her wrist. His grip wasn't tight, but it was absolute. His skin was warm, and for a moment, the air between them seemed to vibrate with a sudden, electric heat. "Don't hide them," he said softly, his thumb grazing the edge of a scar. "My ink covers my past. Your skin just tells the truth." He turned his arm, showing her the intricate dragon that wound from his wrist to his shoulder. "They call me the dragon because they think I'm a monster. But like him," he gestured to Brutus, "I only became what the world required of me to stay alive." For a heartbeat, the mask of the cold mafia boss shattered. Alicia saw the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of a crown made of blood and iron. She didn't pull away. Instead, she saw the man beneath the ink, a survivor who recognized his own kind. A dangerous, magnetic pull tugged at her chest, a spark of attraction that was as terrifying as the predators surrounding her. "We're both just taming the monsters we were given," she whispered. Sung-ho let go of her wrist, but his gaze remained locked on hers, intense and unreadable. He took a slow sip of his drink, the ice clinking against the glass. The silence that followed wasn't cold anymore, it was heavy with the realization that in this fortress of glass, the most dangerous thing wasn't the dog, it was the feeling growing between them. The sanctuary of the Baek estate felt like a fever dream, but 40 miles away, in the fluorescent-choked air of the 14th precinct, the nightmare was very much awake. Captain Marcus Thorne sat in a darkened office that smelled of stale coffee and the metallic tang of old files. He wasn't looking at police reports, he was staring at a graining surveillance photo taken by a private eye near the outskirts of the Baek property. In the photo, a woman's silhouette was visible through the high-tech glass of a solarium. She was kneeling beside a massive black dog. Thorne's jaw tightened, the muscles ticking with a rhythmic, suppressed fury. Alicia Monroe. He had spent 6 months scouring the South Side for her, certain she was rotting in some basement or fleeing across state lines. He never imagined she would have the audacity to hide in the open, sheltered by the most dangerous man in the city. Thorne leaned back, the leather of his chair creaking. To the public, he was a decorated hero of the force. To Alicia, he was the man who had ordered the disappearance of key evidence in a syndicate drug bust, the man she had caught red-handed before she fled. She was more than just a witness, she was a loose end that could unravel his entire career. "You think you're safe behind those iron gates, Alicia," he whispered to the empty room. "You think a dog in a suit can protect you from the law?" He knew he couldn't get a legal warrant. Baek Sung-ho's lawyers were sharks, and his influence reached into the mayor's office. If Thorne moved through the proper channels, the case would be buried before the ink was dry. But Thorne didn't need a warrant, he needed a tactical erasure. He picked up his desk phone and dialed a number that didn't appear on any official police registry. "Assemble the team," Thorne commanded, his voice cold and devoid of hesitation. "Off the books. Black gear, suppressed weapons. We're going to the Baek estate. We're not there to make an arrest. We're there to clear the board." He hung up, the blue light of his computer monitor reflecting in his eyes like a predator's. He would frame it as a rogue gang hit, a tragic consequence of the mafia lifestyle. By the time the dust settled, Alicia would be silenced, and the Dragon of Seoul would be too busy mourning his staff to look for a corrupt captain. Thorne stood and reached for his duty weapon, checking the slide with a practiced, lethal click. He wasn't just a cop anymore, he was a hunter who had finally located his prey. The fortress of glass was about to be shattered, and Alicia Monroe was about to learn that sometimes, the monsters in uniform were far more dangerous than the ones in the shadows. The following night, the air felt thick, charged with a heavy, electric stillness that usually preceded a storm. Alicia was walking the far edge of the estate's perimeter, near the line where the manicured gardens met the dense, untamed woods. Brutus trotted beside her, his movement a rhythmic shadow. He wasn't wearing a leash anymore. He didn't need one. He moved with a new sense of purpose, his eyes constantly scanning the tree line, his ears swiveling to catch the slightest snap of a twig. Sung-ho was 50 yards ahead, walking toward the helipad with his phone pressed to his ear. He looked relaxed, his silhouette sharp against the rising, blood moon that bathed the estate in an eerie, crimson glow. For a moment, it felt like peace. Then, Brutus stopped. His entire body went rigid, his hackles rising like a row of jagged teeth. He didn't bark, Alicia had trained that out of him, but a vibration started deep in his chest, a sound so low it was felt rather than heard. Alicia froze, her instincts screaming. She looked toward the woods and caught the glint of moonlight on steel. "Sung-ho, down," she screamed. The first shot was a suppressed thud, the bullet whistling past Sung-ho's shoulder and shattering a decorative stone pillar behind him. Two figures in black tactical gear emerged from the shadows of the pines, their weapons raised. They weren't Thorne's men, they were too sloppy, their movements signaling the desperate aggression of a rival syndicate hit team. Sung-ho dove behind a marble bench, reaching for the sidearm at his small of his back, but he was pinned. The assassins were moving in a pincer formation, closing the distance before he could get a clear shot. Alicia didn't hesitate. She didn't feel like a waitress or a victim anymore, she felt the cold, sharp clarity of a commander. She locked eyes with Brutus, whose muscles were coiled like a high-tension spring. "Brutus, sector left. Intercept." It was a command the dog had never heard in the lounge, a tactical directive from her K-9 days. Brutus launched himself. He didn't run like a frantic animal, he moved like a heat-seeking missile. He stayed low to the grass, using the shadows of the hedges to mask his approach until he was a blur of black fur and silent fury. The first hitman didn't even see him coming. Brutus didn't go for the throat, that would have been too messy, too slow. He hit the man's center of gravity with the force of a car crash, knocking him backward. With surgical precision, he clamped his jaws onto the man's gun arm, the sound of snapping bone echoing in the night. The second assassin turned to fire, but Sung-ho used the distraction to lean out and fire two precise shots, neutralizing the threat. Silence returned to the garden, broken only by the heavy panting of the dog. Alicia ran to them, her heart hammering. Brutus stood over the downed man, his tail held high, waiting for his next command. He wasn't a killer dog anymore, he was a guardian who had protected his pack. Sung-ho stood up, brushing the dirt from his sleeves. He looked at the assassin, then at the dog, and finally at Alicia. The shock in his eyes was replaced by something deeper, a dark, profound respect. "You didn't just tame him, Alicia," Sung-ho said, his voice low and dangerous. "You weaponized him." The aftermath of the ambush should have felt like a victory, but for Alicia, the air in the estate had turned poisonous. She sat on the edge of her bed in the guest wing, the silence of the room pressing against her ears until her phone vibrated with a jagged, aggressive buzz. It was an encrypted message from an unknown number. Her breath hitched as the video loaded. It wasn't a professional hitman or a mafia threat, it was the cold, sterile light of a police holding cell. Her brother, Marcus, was slumped against a concrete wall, his face a map of fresh bruises and dried blood. A hand reached into the frame, grabbing him by the hair and forcing his head back. He looked small, broken, and terrified. A voice she knew too well, the gravelly, self-assured tone of Captain Thorne, spoke from behind the camera. "He's having a rough night, Alicia. The kind of night people don't walk away from. Unless, of course, his big sister remembers where her loyalties lie." The screen flickered to a photo of a small glass vial and a digital map of the estate's north gate. "You have until 3 a.m., Thorne's voice continued, dropping into a lethal whisper. "Drop the sedative in the dragon's drink. Open the north gate. If those gates aren't unlocked, your brother becomes a tragic statistic by dawn. Don't play hero, Alicia. You're just a waitress in over her head." The phone went black. Alicia felt the walls of the fortress of glass closing in. She walked to the window, looking out at the gardens where, only hours ago, she had stood shoulder to shoulder with Sung-ho. She looked at the vial she had hidden in her dresser, the poison Thorne's mole had planted days ago. She was caught in a cruel irony. The monsters of the underworld, the tattooed boss who looked at her with respect and the beast who rested its head in her lap, had given her more safety and dignity than the man wearing a badge ever had. Sung-ho had treated her like an equal, while the law treated her like a loose end to be burned. A soft scratch at the door made her jump. She opened it to find Brutus standing in the hallway, his tail giving a single, hesitant wag. He sensed the vibration of her fear, his intelligent eyes searching hers for a command. Behind him, down the long, marbled corridor, she could see the light from Sung-ho's study. He was likely in there, vulnerable, trusting the woman who had tamed his dog. The weight of the badge was a crushing force, threatening to shatter everything she had built. To save her blood, she had to destroy her soul. To save her brother, she had to murder the only man who had seen the survivor beneath her scars. Alicia gripped the phone until her knuckles turned white, the blood moon outside casting a sinister shadow across the room. The clock was ticking, and the dragon was waiting for his final drink. The air in Sung-ho's study was thick with the scent of old paper and the sharp, metallic tang of the vial Alicia placed on his mahogany desk. She didn't offer the drink. Instead, she stood before the dragon, her hands trembling as she showed him the video of her battered brother. She waited for the explosion, for the cold snap of his lethal temper, or for him to call the guards to drag her away. Instead, Sung-ho looked at the screen, then back at her, his expression unreadable. He reached out, his tattooed hand covering hers on the desk. "You chose to tell me," he said, his voice a low, dangerous velvet. "Why?" "Because you treated me like a human being," Alicia whispered. "And because I'm tired of being the only one who fights fair." Sung-ho's eyes flashed with a dark, predatory light, not at her, but for the man who had dared to threaten his household. "Then we don't give him a murder, Alicia. We give him a masterpiece." At 3 a.m., the north gate hissed open. Captain Thorne and his rogue team moved like shadows, their black tactical gear blending into the darkness. They stepped into the central courtyard, their boots silent on the stone, their eyes fixed on the ghost of Alicia standing by the main entrance. Thorne smirked, his weapon raised, believing the dragon was slumped over his desk, poisoned and pathetic. "Good girl, Alicia," Thorne whispered as he stepped into the light of the courtyard. "Now move aside while we finish this." But Alicia didn't move. She didn't look afraid. She raised 2 fingers to her lips and let out a sharp, piercing whistle that echoed off the glass walls. From the shadows of the pillars, Brutus didn't just bark, he launched. At the same moment, the estate's massive floodlights ignited, blinding the officers. Sung-ho's security team didn't fire, they simply blocked the exits, holding high-definition cameras and recording devices. Thorne spun, aiming his rifle, but he was too slow. "Brutus, hold." Alicia's voice rang out like a gavel. The dog hit Thorne with the force of a landslide, pinning him to the cold marble. Brutus didn't tear, he simply locked his massive jaws onto Thorne's tactical vest and forearm, his weight anchoring the captain to the ground. Thorne thrashed, but the more he moved, the tighter the grip became. "It's over, Captain," Sung-ho said, stepping calmly from the shadows, his legal team standing behind him with live-streaming tablets. "The world is watching. Tell them about the evidence you burned. Tell them about Alicia's brother." Under the crushing weight of the beast and the steady gaze of the woman he had underestimated, Thorne's composure shattered. He began to scream his confession into the night air, every corrupt word caught by the microphones. Alicia stood over him, her hand resting on Brutus's head, finally holding the power that had been used against her for so long. She wasn't the prey anymore. She was the one holding the leash. The sirens faded into the distance, leaving the air of the estate crisp and strangely purified. The dawn began to bleed across the horizon, a soft palette of gold and lavender that chased away the lingering shadows of the blood moon. Inside the fortress, the screens that once displayed tactical maps now showed news cycles, Captain Thorne in handcuffs, his career a smoldering ruin, and the announcement of a wrongfully detained young man being released from custody. Alicia sat on the wide stone steps of the terrace, her chin resting in her hand. Her phone had buzzed an hour ago, a text from her brother, Marcus, simply saying "I'm out. I'm safe." The weight that had crushed her chest for months had finally lifted, leaving her feeling light, yet curiously anchored. A heavy warmth pressed against her side. Brutus let out a long, contented huff and slumped his massive body against her leg, his eyes closing as he drifted into a peaceful sleep. He was no longer a weapon or a victim, he was home. "He looks different when he isn't waiting for a strike," a voice said. Sung-ho stepped out to join her. He had changed into a clean black shirt, the top buttons undone, his tattoos peeking out like secrets. He didn't sit above her or stand behind her, he sat on the step right beside her, their shoulders nearly touching. He looked out over the sprawling city of Seoul, where the lights were beginning to dim in the face of the morning sun. "The debt is settled, Alicia," he said softly. "Your brother is being moved to a private clinic for his recovery. The creditors have been redirected. You are free. You could walk out of those gates right now and never look back." Alicia looked at the gates, then back at the man who had seen her scars and called them the truth. She looked at the dog who had found his soul in her hands. The world outside offered her a return to the ordinary, but the world inside these walls offered her something she had never truly possessed, power and a partnership built on the wreckage of their pasts. "I don't think I'm a waitress anymore," she said, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. Sung-ho turned to her, his gaze intense, stripping away the cold mask of the mafia boss to reveal a man who was finally letting someone in. "I don't need a waitress. And after tonight, the syndicate knows I don't need another soldier. I need the person who can see the monsters coming before I do. I need the only person the dragon trusts." He held out his hand, palm up, the same gesture of trust she had used to tame Brutus. Alicia didn't hesitate. She placed her hand in his, her fingers locking with his tattooed palm. Together, they stood and walked to the edge of the balcony. Below them, the city was waking up, unaware that its hierarchy had shifted. The boss, the survivor, and the beast stood as a new trinity, silhouetted against the rising sun. They weren't just surviving the underworld anymore, they were ruling it.